Imagine this: a company that literally redefines an entire category, captures intense media buzz, attracts massive investors, promises to change how an industry works, and at its peak is valued at more than $2 billion, despite having minimal real revenue, no proven business model, and a product that barely works. That's not fiction. That's the story of one of the most talked about startups of the 2010s and early 2020s, Theranos. Theranos claimed it would revolutionize healthcare. It said it could run hundreds of medical blood tests from just a few drops of blood, with results faster, cheaper, and more accurately than traditional labs. Doctors, journalists, celebrities, and investors swooned. A startup with no real product raised hundreds of millions, was valued at $900 billion, and turned its founder into a Silicon Valley rock star, all built on hype. So how does hype turn into a $2 billion empire? Let's break it down. The world wants better healthcare, faster, cheaper, less painful. Blood tests are essential, but often slow, expensive, and inconvenient. So when a young entrepreneur named Elizabeth Holmes claimed she had technology that could do all this with just a finger prick, investors leaned in. It wasn't the tech most people bought into, it was the promise. A promise that would rewrite how diagnostics worked. Because who wouldn't want cheaper tests, faster results, less blood drawn, more frequent screenings, early disease detection? This kind of promise hits people where it matters most: health, cost, convenience. And that's where hype finds fertile ground. Early on, Theranos didn't focus on publishing scientific data or peer-reviewed studies. Instead, it controlled the narrative. It got written up in top publications like Forbes, Fortune, and the Wall Street Journal. Holmes was portrayed as the next Steve Jobs, complete with a black turtleneck, charismatic talks, and huge public speaking appearances. Media headlines focused on revolutionary blood testing startup, the future of healthcare, billion-dollar disruption. But here's the key: no one was actually demanding real evidence yet. People were buying the story, not the results. Smart investors saw money pouring in. Names like Tim Draper, the Walton family, Rupert Murdoch's media circle, other institutional backers. They all put tens of millions into Theranos, early and with minimal proof. Why? Because every investor was thinking the same things. If this works, it will be worth billions, so I can't miss out. That psychological trigger, FOMO, fear of missing out, is one of the most powerful drivers in venture capital. When capital markets move fast, funding chases buzz, and valuations rise quicker than fundamentals. That's how hype becomes money power. While the press talked about the revolution, the actual science was deeply flawed. Independent labs that saw the technology were skeptical. Employees internally raised concerns. Data scientists and technicians struggled to get consistent, accurate results from the machines. Yet on the outside, the company continued hosting events, unveiling supposed breakthroughs, and collecting huge fundraising rounds. It's like a magic show: great presentation, no real mechanics. And until someone pulls back the curtain, most people see only the spectacle. Part of the hype wasn't just the techs, it was the people associated with it. Theranos recruited big names such as George Shultz, former US Secretary of State, Henry Kissinger, former US Secretary of State, James Mattis, later US Secretary of Defense, other former generals, government officials, and industry leaders. These weren't just advisors, their presence lent credibility to the public, to investors, and to media. If former world leaders stood behind this technology, it must be legit. But this was a brilliant psychological tactic. People trusted the status of the board more than they questioned the status of the science. That gap made hype feel like a stronger asset than reality. At its peak, Theranos was valued around $9 billion. That's almost unheard of for a healthcare startup with no clear revenue model. How? Because investors didn't base it on earnings or cash flows. They based it on potential. When a story is believed widely enough by press, investors, industry, and the public, the valuation becomes a feedback loop. Press writes hype, investors commit capital, valuation rises. More press writes about the valuation, investors want in because of valuation rise. It becomes a self-reinforcing narrative. And that's exactly what built a $2 billion empire, even if the actual tech didn't exist. Eventually, reality catches up. It always does. Journalists and scientists began asking questions. Why are not the results consistent? Why is Theranos limiting independent reviews? Why are they using traditional machines for most tests? Why can't anyone validate the core technology? Then John Carreyrou, a Wall Street Journal reporter, began digging. His reporting didn't just ask questions. It presented data, testimonies, and internal contradictions. Suddenly, the narrative shifted. And when the public narrative flips, hype turns into skepticism. When buzz becomes a burden, as scrutiny increased, investors began asking for real evidence, partners began backing away, regulators got involved, patients reported inaccurate results, lawsuits were filed. The company once celebrated as a visionary leader was now under federal investigation. The tech that promised to revolutionize healthcare was now exposed as unreliable. The 2,000 billion valuation didn't disappear overnight, but the confidence behind it did. And once confidence falls apart, the money follows. What the world learned from this? The Theranos saga taught investors, journalists, and entrepreneurs some brutal lessons. 1. Hype can outpace fundamentals, but not forever. You can sell a story long before you sell a product, but eventually the market asks for proof. When the gap between promise and deliverable grows too wide, collapse becomes inevitable. 2. Celebrity endorsement, scientific validation. A board full of famous people can create credibility, but it can't create actual technology. This was one of the most important takeaways for biotech investors. Something can look authoritative without being accurate. 3. Media narrative shapes markets. Press can amplify buzz, but it can also amplify bust. Public belief doesn't equal reality, but it does influence money. That's how hype becomes a billion-dollar empire before the fundamentals are even tested. Why this still matters today? Think about all the emerging tech sectors right now: AI, blockchain, Web3, quantum computing, autonomous vehicle, biotech, space startups. Each of these areas has companies with huge valuations, minimal revenue, wild promises, intense media coverage, celebrity endorsements. Sound familiar? The same mechanisms that built hype for Theranos are actively happening today in multiple industries. And the question investors and consumers should be asking is, are we evaluating technology based on evidence or based on stories? Because when hype becomes the main metric, markets become vulnerable. It wasn't just investors who were hurt, patients were harmed. People trusted their health to technology that wasn't verified. Misdiagnoses happened. Lives were affected. This isn't a boardroom issue only. This is a public health issue, and that's part of why the story grabbed so much attention. This wasn't an app flop or a product pivot. This was healthcare. This was trust, and that's what made the hype dangerous. Can an empire built on hype ever recover? Theranos didn't recover. The company dissolved. Executives faced legal consequences, and its failure became a textbook example of how not to build a health tech company. But the deeper question remains, can any empire built on hype recover? Some entities try, they pivot, they rebrand, they change leadership, they market new promises. But the truth is, once the foundation is based more on belief than proof, recovery requires real proof. And that's hard, because once trust breaks, rebuilding it is an uphill battle. The big picture, hype versus reality. Let's zoom out for a moment. The world today is fascinated with disruption. We celebrate rapid growth, unicorn valuations, bold promises, market domination, overnight success. But we rarely pause to ask, what's the basis for the valuation? What's the proof behind the performance? Is there real utility or just compelling storytelling? Theranos showed that the market can be captivated by perceived innovation long before actual innovation exists. This isn't unique to healthcare, it's a pattern seen across industries, and that's why this story resonates. It's not just about one company. It's about how markets, media, and public belief interact. A 2 billion empire built on hype reveals something deeper. Stories influence money, perception influences investment. Belief can outweigh evidence until it doesn't. That's the power and the danger of hype. Because while hype can create giants overnight, reality eventually levels the playing field. And when it does, those without real value, no matter how celebrated, fall. So here's a question for you. Which current tech trend right now do you think is mostly hype, and which one is built on real fundamentals? Drop your thoughts in the comments, because understanding hype isn't just interesting, it's essential for anyone who wants to think critically about where money flows next.